acknowledge the member for Bradfield for moving this motion in relation to cost of living and Services Australia. Let's start with some facts. Services Australia hosts a staggering 9.5 million customer contacts every week, helping Australians access critical services like Centrelink, child support and Medicare and much, much more. Now, the government acknowledges the struggles faced by Australians accessing Services Australia. But let's not dance around the root cause of this issue. The member for Bradfield has conveniently departed, but the blame lies squarely at the feet of the former Liberal government, which the member for Bradfield was a part of. It was a direct result of their slash-and-burn approach to our social services. Instead of nurturing this institution, the former government and the member for Bradfield and his mates chose to decimate it, Deputy Speaker. 3,800 hard-working Australians lost their jobs at Services Australia on the Liberal Party's watch. And why? He talks about automation. Why? To make way for their malicious, profit-driven program like Robodebt. Robodebt is perhaps the greatest failure of the Liberal government, and there's a lot to choose from, Deputy Speaker, but that tells you everything. The scheme was so flawed, so callous, that it inflicted untold suffering upon countless vulnerable Australians. Families were plunged into false debt, individuals faced harassment and intimidation, all at the hands of a government that had long forgotten the meaning of empathy, the meaning of responsibility. The former government said that Robodebt was only going to affect a small cohort. You know what their definition of a small cohort was of Centrelink recipients? That small cohort turned out to be 443,000 Australians. And a significant number of these cases involved constituents in my electorate. And my office worked tirelessly to try to assist these people who had found themselves targeted by this betrayal. At least 3,000 honest people in my electorate of Wills, people facing hardship, were victims of this scheme, this Liberal government scheme, who had false debts under Robodebt. And I'm just going to give you one example. A young man who was on a youth allowance approached my office. He had received an incorrect demand notice for $12,377. $12,000 for a young person. Absolutely shocked by it. Didn't know what to do. And it was just lucky that he spoke to his foster parents and said, "What do I do about this?" And they thought, "Why don't you just go to your local MP?" We intervened and we had that debt cancelled. But that's just one case. More than 500,000 Australians were affected. It's impossible to try and quantify that kind of suffering that was inflicted upon them. The previous government made victims feel like criminals, and many people suicided, tragically. So it is particularly galling to hear the party opposite suggest there has been a failure to embrace digital service delivery. Of course, we are committed to utilising data and digital technologies to improve our service delivery and decision-making. The Data and Digital Government Strategy, the final version released at the end of last year, clearly lays out that commitment, while consulting carefully with Australians to everyone's experience with the government is inclusive, accessible and responsive to need. Given the $1.8 billion Robodebt scheme relied on a hit-and-miss approach, backed by a single piece of internal legal advice based on a vibe, I think that careful consideration and consultation on the impact of digitisation is something worth embracing. Now, we have taken some action, Deputy Speaker. We've introduced 3,000 new recruits to work in regional centres across Australia, an important first step in replacing all those people who lost their jobs, an important first step in correcting the ineptness and the mismanagement of Services Australia's workforce by the previous government. These workers aren't just statistics, they represent a return of humans to government services, the return to a people-centred approach. They're going to work in regional centres across Australia, they're going to help reduce call wait times, and they're going to speed up the claim processing. You're going to actually hear a human being on the other side. It's a huge boost to funding which will support frontline staffing and operation at Services Australia, and it's the first step in getting us back on track. We have an unwavering commitment to restoring integrity and humanity to our social services, Deputy Speaker, and we're taking tangible steps towards rebuilding Services Australia and putting people back at the centre of service delivery.
The question is that the motion be